Hello everyone and welcome to Listitis, where today I'll be doing one of my more controversial countdowns I've ever done. People have argued for nearly 2 decades now on what the best Final Fantasy game is in the series, and continue to do so as more games come out. But the debate is still heated, with everyone having a different opinion on which one is their favorite. Well, I sincerely hope you are ready to get your mind blown as I tell you my top 10 best Final Fantasy games.
Number 10.
Starting off in quite possibly the most fitting way a top 10 could, we are starting from the very beginning. Final Fantasy I was an odd game for sure that threw many people into confusion. Where do I go? What do I do? Why am I here? The first entry in the long-running RPG franchise was a great start and was admittedly bare bones compared to today's games. The world was flush with interesting creatures, characters, and locations, and all the while felt, well, fantastical compared to other games of the time. Some people choose to jump around as a plumber while others slayed beasts. Good news, the series only goes up from here. Well, minus a couple of awful entries.
Number 9.
I'm gonna keep this one short and sweet. Crisis Core is a game that I honestly only threw on here because of the story aspects it added to Final Fantasy VII. The gameplay itself was a little shallow and wasn't a real draw for me, but it's almost impossible to look at Final Fantasy VII's story now without the Crisis Core lore added into the mix.
Number 8.
Final Fantasy II was where the game really started getting off its feet. The progression of characters was better, leveling was easier and more fluid for the player character, character stories were more expansive, and the main story was much deeper than you traditionally get with the hero kill bad guy thing. I mean, okay, it was still hero kills bad guy, but you had more freedom than ever before. And who doesn't love a good betrayal and reclamation arc in a story? I know I do. The characters were a ton easier to grasp onto than they were before due to the fact that they were in-game and not created by players.
Number 7.
I absolutely hated this game when I first played it. I'll admit this. The graphics hurt my eyes, the characters weren't as diverse as 6's were, and above all else, the game pacing was terrible. But then I jumped back into it by watching a buddy play through it the whole game as a spectator. And to be honest, it was enjoyable. The combat was ahead of its time, the music was superb, and I lived to do all the little things and activities that the world had to offer. I hate Sephiroth as a villain, whether he or not he's a good villain is a topic for another time, but the story aside from that, and terrible pacing aside, was pretty rad. But I cannot play it all the way through myself, even though I own it.
Number 6.
Technically, Final Fantasy XII shouldn't even be on this list because it's not a Final Fantasy game. This was another Square IP that was late in production and was transformed into a Final Fantasy game. You can't, however, deny that the game has some serious shine to it. The combat was a bit more my style, taking notes from Star Ocean, and the design team was A+ overall for style. I loved the huge creatures you had to hunt down, and even though the story was traditional Final Fantasy, it definitely made itself its own.
Number 5.
What a game Final Fantasy IX was. One of the games in the best RPG of all time discussion, and deservedly so. The mechanics introduced between 7 and 9 were instant classics with fans. Mini games that dissolved people's hours, cute sub-characters that would become fan favorites, and a villain worth fearing, subjectively obviously, but Kuja stands as the third best villain in the franchise and remains as one of the most memorable characters I've ever had to play against. If you haven't played through 9, it's definitely a journey to take. Even if you have a tail. I mean, come on, Goku had a tail.
Number 4.
Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. Positions 2, 3, and 4 were incredibly hard to choose between. And unironically, my 4th favorite game in the Final Fantasy franchise is the 4th game in the Final Fantasy franchise. Alliteration Colossal Killing Spree. Final Fantasy IV was an incredible game, and arguably the best story in the franchise. Mechanically, the game was akin to 2 and 3, but man, this is where the franchise really started doing some serious non-mythos writing. The cast was great! I mean, there were series favorites like Cid, Cecil, Edge, Palam, Param. The games It introduced the action time battles, the first game to have the main character originally a bad guy. I could gush about FF4 all day, but we have other things to attend to. Also, the fantastic 3D remake is now available on Steam, and it's so good.
Number 3.
Crystal Chronicles being this high, or even being on this list, might piss you off. But if you looked past the money-hungry Nintendo co-op fiasco and the unusual dungeon-crawling gameplay, Crystal Chronicles is one of the best playing games, with FF slapped on it. Solo or with friends, this charming adventure kept me entertained for 4 years. Yes, years after I first got it. The combat was fun and unique, the miasma added some tension, boss fights were phenomenal, each location had their own lore, replayability was through the roof, and the music! The soundtrack might even be the best part of this game if I'm being brutally honest. I wish they would release a PC port of this that supported online co-op with no cables or Game Boys needed. I would play the shit out of some Crystal Chronicles now.
Number 2.
The first game in the series that I truly loved. The job system was an innovation that made so many people's experience vibrant and exciting. The idea of advancing your 4 main characters through over a dozen different pathways was something that by that point in the franchise people weren't used to having. A franchise hasn't yet found a proper footing on how to do progression. And who could forget one of my personal favorite stories and villains? Exdeath is just an asshole. He isn't your generic bad guy, but he had his own flavor instead. I don't know how the PC port of this game is, but if it is functional, please let me know and I will pick it up immediately.
And number 1.
Final Fantasy VI, or 3 depending on the region you bought it in, it's one of role-playing games' finest examples. It has memorable characters, great combat, a grandiose story with ups, downs, fantastic writing, enchanting music, adjectively adjective climax and resolution. I cannot sing praise for this game enough. Kefka is one of, if not the best video game villain of all time, and earns the game enough points just on his own. But that would be discrediting Sabin, Terra, Edgar, and the whole cast. This game is timeless, a word that I don't even use that often, and it can still be fired up today for a good journey. Be prepared though, this game does get to you. Well, thank you so much for watching my video. Remember to let me know what your favorite Final Fantasy games down in the comments are. If you enjoyed the video, why not give it a like, and if you enjoyed me, why not subscribe today and join the ever-growing hybrid. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.